The wind screamed like a living creature. Waves collared and houses crashed against the ship's hull, and the timbers groaned like they were begging for mercy. Lanterns swung violently, throwing flashes of orange light across the drenched deck, where men clung to ropes and shouted prayers into the chaos. The smell of gunpowder, salt, and fear filled the air. Through the roar, a man stood tall, unflinching. His beard, thick and black as night, whipped across his face, braided with small ribbons that fluttered like battle flags. Smoke curled around his head from the burning slow fuses tucked beneath his hat, making him look like a creature risen from the pit itself. "Hold the line, you dogs," he bellowed, voice booming through the storm. "If we die as kings of the sea." That man, Edward Teach, known to the world as Blackbeard, had once been just a boy, standing on a quiet dock in Bristol, staring out at this same endless sea, dreaming of adventure. He could never have known then that one day the same ocean he loved would both crown him and kill him. Edward's childhood was shaped by the rhythm of the harbour. Bristol in 1680 was a place of noise and motion, the clatter of hoofs on cobblestones, the shouts of merchants, the thick stench of fish and tar. Ships came and went constantly, carrying silk from the east, rum from the Caribbean, and slaves from Africa. Edward would spend hours sitting by the water's edge, watching the masts rock gently against the sky. "Someday," he'd whisper, "I'll have one of my own." His father, a worn-out sailor with hands like rope, didn't encourage the dream. "The sea's a curse, lad," he'd say, smoking his pipe. "She'll love you one day and swallow you the next." But Edward couldn't be warned. The sea wasn't just water to him, it was freedom. Every gust of wind carried the scent of somewhere else, places without walls, without rules. When his father went to sea for months, young Edward helped his mother and siblings at home. She was kind but weary, always glancing toward the window when the tides turned, as if waiting for something or someone that would never come back. At night, Edward would lie awake listening to the creak of ships beyond the harbour. Sometimes, if the wind blew just right, he could hear sailors singing. He'd close his eyes and imagine himself among them, fearless, wild, alive. He left Bristol at 18, the smell of salt still clinging to his clothes. He didn't even say goodbye properly. His mother cried quietly, pressing a silver coin into his hand for luck. His father, half drunk at the dock, only grunted, "You'll learn soon enough what luck's worth on the water." Edward Teach stepped aboard his first ship with nothing but determination and a fire in his chest. He was a nobody then, a deckhand with quick eyes and quicker hands. But inside, something had already begun to stir. The sea hardened him. The War of the Spanish Succession raged across the Atlantic, and England's navy and privateers prowled for Spanish gold like wolves. Edward became one of them, a privateer. It was legal piracy, a way for the king to wage war through hungry men. He learned fast how to read the wind, how to reload a cannon before it burned your hands, how to stare down death and not blink. He learned that battles weren't won by strength, but by fear. If your enemies believed you were mad enough to kill them all, they'd surrender before the first shot. That lesson would later define him. One night, after a brutal raid in the Caribbean, Edward stood on the deck of a captured Spanish galleon, looking down at the wreckage, blood mixed with seawater, the moon shining on torn sails. The silence after battle was worse than the noise. A sailor beside him muttered, "Where the king's men now? Ain't it grand?" Edward said nothing. He was staring at his reflection in the black water. For the first time, he didn't see a man. he saw a shadow, a shape taken form, something that would never quite be human again. When the war ended, everything changed. The king's legal killers were suddenly jobless. Thousands of trained sailors drifted through the ports, angry, broke, and dangerous. The letters of marque that once made them heroes were now worthless paper. Edward tried to find honest work, but the merchant ships paid starvation wages. Worse, the captains treated him like dirt. You want gold? Then go dig for it, boy. The king's done feeding killers like you. That night, Edward sat alone in a rum-soaked tavern, listening to the wind batter the shutters. All around him were the same kind of men, ex-soldiers, sailors, privateers, lost, bitter, desperate. And in that smoky chaos, something inside him snapped. He realized the truth. The world only respected power. Laws were just chains for the weak. Men like him were built for something else, something darker. When a grinning stranger at the bar mentioned the captain named Benjamin Hornigold, who was gathering men in Nassau for free sailing, Edward didn't hesitate. He leaned forward, eyes glinting. Where do I find him? Nassau in those days was a kingdom of lawless men. The streets stank of rum, sweat, and rebellion. Tattered flags fluttered from broken ships turned into taverns. You could buy anything there, a pistol, a ship, or a man's soul, if you had enough gold. That's where Edward Teach found his calling. Hornigold was no fool. He saw in Edward something rare, a natural leader, fearless and sharp. You've got the eyes of a man who's seen too much, Hornigold said when they first met. You'll do fine out here if you remember one thing. Keep your men happy and your enemies terrified. Under Hornigold's command, Edward learned the pirate's craft, how to strike fast, vanish quicker, and always make the world think you were 10 times bigger than you were. But ambition burns hotter than loyalty. When Hornigold captured a massive French ship in 1717, a beauty packed with slaves and sugar, Edward made his move. He took the ship as his own, refitted her with heavy guns, and renamed her the Queen Anne's Revenge. From that day, he was no longer Edward Teach. He became Blackbeard, a name whispered with dread in every port from the Carolinas to the Bahamas. His legend didn't grow from cruelty alone. It came from his genius for theater. Before battle, he would braid his thick beard and tie ribbons into it. He'd tuck slow-burning fuses under his hat so smoke poured from his face like hellfire. The effect was terrifying, half man, half demon. When a merchant captain once saw that burning silhouette appear through the fog, he dropped his sword immediately. "The devil walks the sea," he cried. Blackbeard didn't even have to fire a shot. He understood what few men ever do. Fear is the cheapest weapon and the most effective. Still, behind the smoke and fury, there was a strange kind of code. Blackbeard didn't kill needlessly. He preferred surrender, the thrill of dominance, not destruction. And he shared his spoils fairly, which made his crew fanatically loyal. But every legend has a crack beneath the surface. Blackbeard's was the silence. Those long nights when the ocean went still, and he'd stand on the deck, staring at the horizon. The fire in his beard gone, only the man remained. Sometimes his quartermaster, Israel Hands, would approach quietly. "You never sleep, Captain." "Sleep," he muttered, his voice low. "I'll sleep when I'm forgotten." The sea whispered around them, endless and dark.
Blackbeard's power grew fast. He commanded not one ship, but 4, and hundreds of men who'd follow him into hell itself. He ruled the Caribbean trade routes like a phantom. But he wasn't after gold alone. He wanted to be remembered, not as a thief, but as a force. That's why he did it. The blockade of Charleston in 1718. It was madness. Even Hornigold, now reformed, would have called it suicide. But Blackbeard saw something no one else did. Fear could make kings kneel. For a full week, he choked off one of the richest ports in the colonies. No ship dared move. The people of Charleston starved, while the colonial governor begged for mercy. And when Blackbeard finally sent his demand, it wasn't for gold, it was for medicine. Half his crew was dying of fever, and he wanted what they needed. But he made sure everyone would remember how he asked for it, with a pistol in one hand and fire in his eyes. When the governor delayed, Blackbeard sent word that he'd start executing prisoners and send their heads floating into the harbor. The medicine arrived the next day. As his ship sailed away, his men laughing and drunk, Blackbeard stood at the stern of the Queen Anne's Revenge, staring back at the city. "You see, lads," he said softly, "the world bows to whoever dares frighten it the most." But beneath his grin, there was a flicker of something else. Exhaustion. The more power he took, the more restless he became. The sea never lets a man rest for long. That night, as the fleet drifted under the stars, Blackbeard walked alone on deck. The air smelled of rum and smoke. The moon cast silver across the water. From the shadows, Israel Hands spoke quietly. "You ever think of stopping, Captain? Taking the king's pardon, maybe? We've got more gold than we can spend." Blackbeard didn't answer right away. He looked out at the horizon, where the dark sea met the sky. "Stopping," he said at last. "Tell me, Hans, what becomes of a storm when it stops?" Hans frowned. "It dies out." "Aye," Blackbeard said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "And I was never meant to die quietly."
The Caribbean sun burned like molten gold over the quiet plantations of Barbados. The wind smelled of sugar and smoke, drifting over acres of cane swaying under the heat. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of laughter from the slaves' quarters carried faintly through the humid air, a reminder that the island's wealth came from blood and chains. In a whitewashed manor house near Bridgetown, Major Steed Bonnet sat in his study, staring at a book he wasn't reading. The room was lined with shelves, hundreds of volumes on philosophy, politics, and navigation, but the silence inside him drowned them all out. He had everything a man could want: land, wealth, servants, and respect. Yet every day he woke with the same hollow ache in his chest. His wife barely spoke to him except to complain. His children avoided him, afraid of his temper. But the truth was simpler. He wasn't cruel. He was just bored. He stared out the window at the endless sea glittering beyond the hills. He'd spent his life watching it from a distance, wondering what freedom might feel like. And on that suffocating afternoon, something in him broke. He closed the book, stood up, and said quietly to himself, "I will go to sea." He didn't mean it as poetry. He meant it literally. The idea was absurd. He had never commanded a ship, never lived rough, never been in a real fight. But that only made it worse. The thought that he would die in this house someday, surrounded by the
dust of books and the cold disapproval of his wife. So he made a decision that would turn his name into a tragic joke in history. He went to the shipyards and bought a sloop. He paid for it in full, fitted it with 10 cannons, and christened it the Revenge. Instead of stealing it like a pirate, he purchased it like a gentleman. Then he hired a crew of 70 men, rough, scarred sailors who laughed openly at their strange new captain. They weren't used to being paid wages by the month. They were used to plunder. But Bonnet's gold was good, and they took it. He even packed his library aboard, filling the captain's cabin with books. The crew mocked him behind his back. "A pirate with a bookshelf," one said. "Next he'll be serving tea in battle." Still, Bonnet believed he could make this work. He wore fine coats even at sea, spoke politely to his men, and insisted on being called Major. He gave thoughtful lectures on discipline and order, and his men ignored him completely. When a sailor cursed, he scolded him. When another brawled, he ordered him to read scripture. Within a month, half the crew wanted to mutiny. But fate had something else planned for the gentleman pirate. One night, as the Revenge drifted near the Bay of Honduras, the lookout cried out, "Sails on the horizon!" A fleet was approaching, led by a massive ship flying a black flag with a skeletal horned devil holding an hourglass. The crew froze. They knew that flag. It was the Queen Anne's Revenge. When Bonnet saw the dark silhouette through his spyglass, his stomach dropped. The ship moved like a predator, silent, deliberate, inevitable. He could almost feel the power radiating from it. "Captain," his quartermaster said nervously, "that's the Queen Anne's Revenge. They say her captain's got smoke for a soul." Bonnet swallowed hard. Perhaps we can reason with him." The crew looked at each other. Reason with Blackbeard? Within an hour, a small boat approached. The men on board wore pistols and knives, but they didn't attack. One of them, tall, sunburned, missing an ear, shouted across the water, "Captain Teach wants a word with the gentleman who bought his own ship." Bonnet, sweating through his velvet coat, agreed to meet. Blackbeard was everything the rumors promised. He stood tall, shoulders broad, with eyes that seemed to burn even without the fuses. When he smiled, it was like watching a wolf bare his teeth. "Major Bonnet," he said in a deep, measured voice, "I hear you're a scholar turned sailor." "Indeed, sir, I seek adventure." Blackbeard chuckled. "Adventure, eh? Aye, the sea gives plenty of that, along with fever, mutiny, and cannonballs." The men around him laughed, but Teach raised a hand for silence. He studied Bonnet with curiosity, not mockery. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. Buying your own ship, hiring a crew of cutthroats. Brave or foolish, I can't tell which." Bonnet, desperate to be taken seriously, said, "I wish to learn, Captain Teach. I may lack experience, but I've read much on the art of navigation." Teach's eyes glinted. "Books won't save you when the sea decides she's done with you." They talked for hours that night. Bonnet poured out his frustrations, his cold marriage, his boredom, and his yearning for something real. Teach listened quietly, seeing an opportunity unfold before him. When dawn came, the deal was made. Teach would mentor Bonnet, letting him sail alongside the Queen Anne's Revenge. But in truth, it was no partnership. It was a quiet takeover. "Keep your title, Major," Teach said with a grin. "Let the world think you're captain of your ship. But you'll have my man Israel Hands take the helm for a while, just until you learn the ropes." Bonnet agreed, relieved. He had no idea he'd just handed his ship over. Weeks turned into months. Bonnet lived aboard the Queen Anne's Revenge, treated politely but never truly free. Teach gave him fine food, wine, and books, his favorite luxuries, but made sure his crew saw him as a joke. To the pirates, Bonnet was entertainment. The gentleman pirate, they'd say with smirks. He'll serve in a text of Aristotle before he cuts your throat.
Blackbeard, meanwhile, used Bonnet's ship as an extension of his own power. 2 vessels meant twice the reach, and Bonnet's polite reputation made good cover for raids. At night, Bonnet would sit in his cabin, listening to the laughter outside, the sound of drunken men celebrating crimes he barely understood. He'd open his books, but the words no longer comforted him. He had traded boredom for humiliation. Once, during a quiet night off the coast of Hispaniola, he finally confronted Teach. "Captain Teach," he said, his voice trembling with frustration, "I feel displaced. I am a captain in name only. You've taken my ship, my crew." Teach looked up from polishing a pistol. "And given you protection, Major. You'd be dead without me. Your men would have gutted you the first week." "I wanted to be free," Bonnet said bitterly. Teach smiled. "And you are. You're free from your wife, your land, your dull little life. But you forgot something, Major. Freedom always has a price." He stood, towering over Bonnet. "The sea doesn't care who you were. Out here, there's only who you are." Months later, when they blockaded Charleston, Bonnet watched helplessly from the deck as Blackbeard orchestrated the terror. Ships trapped in the harbor, merchants screaming, cannon smoke blotting out the sun. Blackbeard moved through the chaos like a conductor leading a symphony of fear. Bonnet stood near the railing, hands shaking. "This isn't bravery," he whispered. "It's madness." Beside him, Israel Hands smirked. "Madness keeps us alive." When the ransom finally arrived, chests full of medicine, Bonnet saw Blackbeard's power for what it truly was, not just in his guns or ships, but in his ability to make entire cities kneel. And for the first time, Bonnet felt not admiration, but envy. After Charleston, the pressure mounted. The British Navy hunted them relentlessly. Blackbeard knew his fame was becoming a curse, so he made a plan, a quiet, treacherous one. He told Bonnet they'd take the king's pardon together in North Carolina, retire rich and safe. "We've earned our rest, haven't we, old friend?" he said warmly, clapping him on the shoulder. Bonnet's heart lifted. "Truly?" "Aye," Teach smiled. "You can have your ship back, a captain again." For the first time in months, Bonnet believed him. He sailed the Revenge to Bath to secure the pardon, dreaming of peace, maybe even redemption. When he returned days later, the harbor was empty. The Queen Anne's Revenge was gone. Blackbeard had vanished, and with him, all the treasure, all the weapons, and every last coin. The Revenge was stripped bare. Bonnet stood on the deck, staring at the wreck of his pride. His hands trembled as realization sunk in. The laughter of his crew echoed in his head. The gentleman pirate! He had been a fool from the beginning. In the silence that followed, something dark took root inside him. Not the bookish melancholy that once haunted his nights, but a deep, cold rage. He whispered to the wind, "I'll find you, Edward Teach, and I'll end you." But the sea only laughed back. The sky above the Carolina coast was the color of old iron, heavy, cold, and waiting to break.
The sea beneath it lay flat as glass, but everyone knew that silence on the water was never a blessing. In the marshes of Bath, Stede Bonnet stared at what was left of his ship. The Revenge, once his dream, his escape, his pride, was now a skeleton of cracked wood and missing masts. The men stood in silence, afraid to speak, as Bonnet paced the deck like a ghost. "Gone," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "He's stolen from me for the last time." His quartermaster, a short, broad man named Hardy, shifted uneasily. "Captain, what's done is done. The man's a legend. He's smoke in the wind. No one catches Blackbeard." Bonnet turned, eyes blazing. "Then we'll become smoke ourselves." In the months that followed, Bonnet tried to live like a real pirate. He renamed his battered sloop the Royal James, swore off books, and began raiding small ships along the Delaware and Chesapeake coasts. It was pitiful work compared to the grand exploits of his former mentor. He had no real network, no powerful allies, just a handful of desperate men and a hunger for revenge. But in that hunger, Bonnet discovered something he'd never known before: courage born of despair. He no longer tried to lead like a gentleman. He learned to shout, to curse, to fight with his own hands. And though his crew still doubted him, they began to fear him too. Yet for all his newfound steel, the sea had already marked him for tragedy. By late summer of 1818, the Royal James limped into the swamps of the Cape Fear River in North Carolina. The ship was leaking, the men sick and half-starved. Bonnet hoped to repair her quietly, away from the Navy's eyes. But fate was already steering the noose toward his neck. South Carolina's Governor Robert Johnson had grown tired of pirate flags haunting his coast. Blackbeard was gone, but his ghost lingered. So he sent Colonel William Rhett, a hard-nosed naval officer, to hunt down the remaining scum of the sea. Two small war sloops, the Henry and the Sea Nymph, slipped into the mouth of the Cape Fear River in late September, their sails low, their guns ready. When Bonnet saw them approach, he knew instantly this wasn't a chance encounter. "War sloops," Hardy said grimly. "No merchant runs that clean." "Then let's give them what they came for." The battle that followed was chaos. Cannon thundered, echoed through the swamp, shaking flocks of birds from the mangroves. Smoke rolled across the water, turning day into dusk. At the first volley, all three ships ran aground in the mud, trapped by the falling tide. For hours they fired blindly at each other across the narrow river, the sound of splintering wood and screams blending into one endless roar. Bonnet fought like a man possessed, his fine coat soaked with powder and sweat. He moved from gun to gun, shouting orders, firing until the cannons burned his palms. "Load again! Don't let them breathe!" But courage couldn't fight physics. When the tide turned, Rhett's ships floated free, while the Revenge stayed stuck fast. The enemy's guns opened up from both sides, shredding the deck to pieces. At last, Hardy seized Bonnet by the arm. "It's over, Captain. We can't win." Bonnet's voice cracked. "Then we die fighting." "Die for what?" Hardy shouted. "For a man who already left you for dead?" The words hit like a blade. Bonnet's rage drained away, leaving only exhaustion. His men, bleeding, broken, looked at him with hollow eyes. Slowly, he raised the white flag. The battle was over. The gentleman pirate's final act was surrender. They chained Bonnet and his crew and dragged them south to Charleston, the very city Blackbeard had humiliated months earlier. The irony was cruel. Crowds gathered in the streets, spitting at the prisoners as they were marched through. "Hanging's too kind for you lot. Go rot with your black-hearted friend." But Bonnet barely heard them. His mind was somewhere else, wandering through memories of Barbados, the quiet garden, the smell of rain, the weight of the life he had thrown away. When the trial began, Judge Nicholas Trott wasted no time. "You were born a gentleman, Major Bonnet, and yet you turned to robbery and murder. What defense can you offer?" Bonnet's voice trembled. "I was lost, my lord. I sought purpose. I found only ruin." Trott's eyes hardened. "You had every gift, and you squandered it. Men like you stain civilization itself." The verdict came swiftly: death by hanging.
On the morning of December 10th, 1718, Stead Bonnet stood on the gallows overlooking Charleston Harbor. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of understanding. He had traded a life of comfort for a dream of freedom, and found only chains. The priest beside him murmured a prayer. Bonnet didn't listen. He was staring at the water, at the same horizon that had called to him years ago from his study window. "If only," he whispered, "I'd been brave enough to live instead of trying to die grandly." The trapdoor fell open. The gentleman pirate swung, and the crowd roared. Far to the north, in the narrow inlets of Ocracoke, another kind of reckoning was taking shape. Blackbeard had vanished after Charleston, hiding among the shallows and swamps of North Carolina. With his treasure stashed and the king's pardon forged by corrupt officials, he lived like a lord among thieves, drinking, feasting, and pretending the world had forgotten him. But the world never forgets monsters. Virginia's governor, Alexander Spotswood, had heard enough of the rumors. He called Blackbeard a plague and swore to end him personally. Without waiting for permission from the Crown or even from North Carolina, he secretly commissioned 2 armed sloops, Ranger and Jane, under the command of Lieutenant Robert Maynard. Their mission was simple: find Edward Teach and cut his head. The night of November 21st, 1718, was thick and windless when Maynard's ships crept into Ocracoke Inlet. The moon hung low, lighting the maze of channels and shifting sands. In the distance, anchored in the calm water, lay a single ship, the Adventure, Blackbeard's last vessel. On its deck, the pirates were drinking. Laughter, music, and the faint crackle of a fire drifted across the water. Maynard's men rowed in silence, their oars barely whispering. At dawn, Blackbeard noticed the approaching sloops. He squinted into the light, a grin slowly spreading across his face. "So," he said, pouring himself another drink, "the king's men come to dance." His quartermaster, Israel Hands, limped up beside him. "They're not flying colors, Captain. Might be tricking us." Blackbeard chuckled. "Then we'll trick 'em first." He ordered the anchor cut and the sails raised. The Adventure glided forward, her guns loaded, her crew roaring for battle. As the enemy drew near, he shouted across the water, "You villains! Who are you, and what do you want?" From the other ship, Maynard's voice rang out, "We are for the King of England." Blackbeard lifted his cup high. "Damnation seize my soul if I give or take quarter. Fire!" The first broadside ripped through the air. Cannon smoke swallowed the dawn. Maynard's men screamed as splinters and iron tore through their decks. One of his ships nearly sank on the spot. But Maynard wasn't done. He ordered his surviving crew below deck, making his own vessel look deserted, dead in the water. "Let him come," he whispered. Blackbeard saw the empty deck and laughed. "The cowards hide," he turned to his men. "Board them! Finish the job!" The Adventure slammed into Maynard's ship with a crash of timber. Grappling hooks flew. Pirates poured across, blades flashing. And then, from the hatch below, Maynard's hidden men exploded upward, firing pistols point blank. The fight turned into a storm of steel. Blackbeard was in the center of it, roaring, slashing, a giant wreathed in smoke. Pistols fired, swords clashed, men screamed and fell. Maynard himself met him on the blood-streaked deck. The two men circled each other, panting, eyes locked. "You're finished, Teach," growled Maynard. Blackbeard grinned through blood-streaked teeth. "Then I'll finish standing." Their blades met with a crash. Sparks flew. Maynard's sword snapped under the weight of Blackbeard's blow. The pirate raised his cutlass for the kill, and one of Maynard's sailors lunged from behind, driving a blade deep into Blackbeard's neck. The monster staggered. Another shot rang out, then another. 5 bullets, 20 cuts. Still Blackbeard fought on, swinging wildly, until finally his knees buckled. He sank slowly to the deck, the smoke rising from his beard, fading into the wind. "Finish it," he gasped. Maynard stepped forward, sword trembling in his hand. "Rest in hell, Edward Teach." He swung once, clean and hard. The head rolled across the planks. The body twitched once, then was still. They hung Blackbeard's head from Maynard's bowsprit as proof. The waves around Ocracoke that day ran red, and for weeks afterwards, sailors swore they saw strange lights beneath the water at night, as if something down there refused to stay dead. The golden age of piracy died with him. In the years that followed, the gallows replaced the taverns, and the flags of skull and bone vanished from the horizon. But the stories didn't die. They only grew louder. In London, a writer calling himself Captain James Johnson published a book, A General History of the Pirates. It told of Blackbeard's fury, Bonnet's folly, and all the bloody glory between. The world was hungry for legends, and the sea had given them 2. One, a devil who ruled through fear. The other, a dreamer destroyed by it. And yet, in the quiet hours, when the wind howls across the waves and lanterns flicker in seaside taverns, sailors still whisper his name. They say, if you stand on the shore at midnight, you can hear him, the rasp of a voice carried on the tide. Light the fuses, lads, the devil still sails. And out there, where the moon meets the horizon, a single shadowed ship drifts through the mist, her sails torn, her decks empty, but her flag, black as death, still flies, because legends never drown.